This week on episode 15 of Ad Library Teardown, where we rank brands from zero to ecom hero, is SodaStream. And this is a special episode because if you know me, you know I love a SodaStream. So very hard to be unbiased this week, but I think I did an okay job. But you can be the judge of where this amazing, bubbly, addictive company stacks up against the rest. And the first thing we'll look at today is asset type. Really nice mix of asset type within the SodaStream account. 57% video, 29% static, 14% motion. So we would give that an A on our refreshed grading scale, more visually appealing this week. So A for asset type, D for frameworks. Not a ton of diversity from a framework perspective. We're going to touch on that in a second. Hooks, room for improvement as well, mainly using strong graphic design for visual hooks. We're going to touch on why authenticity and verbal hooks are important in today's episode as well. And then iterations. They are iterating well within what's working, which is clearly a big headline framework. We're going to touch on that. If you are wondering why I keep saying we're going to touch on that, it's because today's episode is all focused on why are these four variables the ones we even look at to grade an account. So if you're a creative strategist, or if you're running strategy at a brand, or if you're at an agency, I'm going to explain exactly why these four variables can really simplify your life. And speaking of simplifying life, my life was simplified this week because typically in the past I would manually calculate and count how many assets were video and motion and statics within an account. I would listen to assets, I would hear all the hooks, and my life was simplified this week through a new tool that I used from Foreplay called Spider. This is a new product that they launched, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks ago. I just heard about it this week and I had some free credits. So I checked it out and this was so simple, saved me so much time. If you're a creative strategist, you have to check it out. It analyzes hooks for you. You can look at creative tests of your competitors, figure out what their asset type mix is, check it out. It's a no-brainer. But getting into why those four variables are important to the overall health of your account, we'll start with asset type. Asset types are important because this is what Meta looks at to place your assets. Some customers engage more with video. Some customers engage more with static. Some customers engage more with motion. If you only have video, if you only have static, or if you only have motion, you're limiting your placement options in front of these potential customers. So having a mix is recommended. And what should you be shooting for? We typically recommend a mix of 50 to 60% video, 20 to 30% static, and 10 to 30% motion, which you can see SodaStream does a great job, and that's why they got an A for asset type. Moving on to frameworks. We typically recommend that any brand test 5 high impact frameworks within their account to add to that diversity. This is where SodaStream has some room for improvement. You can really see 2 frameworks present on the screen here. The ones on the left, where you can see my mouse, are what we would consider a big headline framework. These are really impactful, really a foundational framework for any brand. Allows you to communicate simply with the customer, also really good for offers or sales, but it shouldn't be the only framework that you're really leaning into. On the right-hand side here, we have UGC, which we would consider also a foundational framework, but only 2 of the 5. So if I were SodaStream, I would also look at how do we bring the customer more into this? Can we do customer reviews? Could we do green screen UGC? Could we look at product features? There's tons of competitors out there. How are we differentiating ourselves? So there's a lot of things that you could add into the strategy to continue to test and diversify your frameworks. And that's why they had room for improvement there. Now looking at hooks. We separate hooks into 2 sides, visual and verbal. Visual hooks are often done through graphic design. So having a graphic designer that can have those strong colors, those strong animations, those strong transitions, and really keep someone engaged within the asset and hook them visually right off the bat. And then most people are familiar also with verbal hooks. So this one was an example within the account. Have you ever had a Utah soda? I've never had a Utah soda. So this was an effective hook to grab my attention to see how could I have a Utah soda? Because we all know I've got the SodaStream ready to go. So hooks are important. Where SodaStream had room for opportunity was on the verbal hooks. There's not a ton of UGC. There's not a ton of authenticity in this account. So there's not even room for testing a lot of those verbal hooks, which can tell you a lot about your customer and what they're engaged with. So moving on to the final variable, we also look at iterations. This is essentially finding something that works and making more. SodaStream does a great job of this, almost too good. So these are all examples of big headline frameworks from within the account. If you went to the account, they're testing 100 assets. I would say probably 80% of them that aren't video, maybe even 90% are big headline framework. So this speaks to them knowing what works for them, but also being a little timid, I guess, to test other frameworks and to continue to grow that creative testing strategy. So here's the recap. Again, great job on asset types, frameworks, not so much, hooks, average, room for improvement, and then iterations, a good job, but it is kind of limiting that overall strategy. So drum roll, please. It's at the end this week. Where does SodaStream stack up on the most official grading scale in Ecom 0 to Ecom Hero? SodaStream is a 5.8. This was a fun account to review. Nice room for opportunity, but also a great foundation. And that is all for this week's episode of Ad Library Teardown, episode 15. Think about that. That's pretty cool. And we'll see you again next week for another episode of Ad Library Teardown.